today we're talking about 5 signs that you may be losing muscle instead of fat. Now, this is so important to understand because, as we've talked about so many times in previous episodes, your muscle equals your metabolism. So if you're losing muscle, that means your metabolism is slowing down, which means that it is going to get harder and harder to not only lose weight, but keep it off. So we want to make sure that we're focusing on losing the right type of weight, which is fat in this case. So the signs that you may be losing muscle instead of fat. Sign number 1 is that you're losing weight too quickly. Obviously, in the world of weight loss, it can often feel like all progress is slow progress. So we typically want the weight off like yesterday. Usually once we embark on a journey to lose weight, it's because we're kind of like fed up. We're ready to have these changes happen almost overnight. So there may not seem like there is such a thing as losing weight too quickly, but there is. If you are losing weight at a rate faster than like 1 to 2 pounds per week, especially for women, then the likelihood that some of that weight is muscle is extremely high. So guys can lose a slightly higher amount, but typically for women, anything more than that 2 pounds, max 2 pounds is really pushing it. If you're at the 2 pound mark, there's still a likelihood that you could be losing some muscle instead of just fat. Then that's something to take into consideration. So you definitely want to pace yourself, even though it seems like, well, wait a minute, if I have 50 pounds to lose and you're telling me that it may take me 50 weeks, which is like a year, right? Yes. So that is one of the things that seems like it is something that is very painful, because typically if you're someone who has 50 to 100 pounds to lose, you want to do as much damage as possible, usually within that year and usually within like months time frame. But as tempting as it is to go on journeys that guarantee you more weight, more than that 1 to 2 pounds a week weight loss, or doing things that cause you to lose more than that 1 to 2 pounds per week, then it's actually something that's going to come back to bite you in the long run. So that quick little stint that you have in the beginning ends up being tacked on to the end of your journey when your metabolism slows down and you're either starting to regain some of that weight, or things just come to a halt and you don't really see any progress at all. So that's one of the things that you really want to keep track of in the beginning, is losing weight too quickly or attempting things that cause you to lose weight too quickly. Number 2, and it kind of goes along with number 1, is that you're not doing any strength training. So if you have changed up your diet, maybe you started adding in some cardio, you're doing some walks or some jogging, or you're getting on a treadmill at the gym, you're doing yoga, whatever the case may be, you've added in some movement, you maybe changed up things with your diet, you're starting to take in less calories than you're burning, and the weight's starting to come off. But if you are not including strength training with that, then the likelihood of the losses that you're seeing is probably going to be muscle. So that's something to keep in mind, is that building muscle, the things that you do to build muscle are also the things that you would do to keep it. So a lot of times people just look at strength training, lifting weights as something to do when they want to build muscle, but it's very important that when you're on the flip side of that, and when you're trying to finally like step into losing weight, losing fat especially, you still want to keep the strength training in, even though the scale will go down whether you include strength training or not. So when you're just looking to lose weight, sure, all you have to do is probably change up the way that you're eating, or add in some extra activity just so that your calorie burn is higher than your calorie intake, and the scale will typically move, especially when it's your like early stages of dieting, your first, second, third diet. Typically that's all that you have to do. But as I've discussed in previous videos, after a while those same efforts don't work anymore, and this is part of that reason, because the muscle loss, because the metabolic slowdown, and because of this, the fact that we're not including that strength training in the picture when we're losing the weight. So if you are losing weight, and again, take number 1, if you're losing weight at a rate that's faster than that 1 to 2 pounds per week, and you're not including strength training, then that just double the chances that you are probably losing muscle instead of losing fat. So don't be, tricked by the fact that the scale is going down, because if that muscle loss is happening, so is that metabolic slowdown. The number 3 sign that you are likely losing muscle instead of fat when you're losing weight is that your diet is too restrictive. Now, again, this is probably what's going to cause the first tip. So the person that is usually losing more than 1 to 2 pounds per week usually is on a very restrictive diet. Like, you have to do a lot of things and make like very, very strict moves in order to get that needle to move that extreme. So typically this person is having more than like a 300 to 500 calorie deficit. They have a deficit more of like 800, 1,000, 1,500 calories. So this is a person that should be eating maybe around 3,000 calories or so on average. And for weight loss, maybe would be okay with eating 2,500. But instead, they go from eating over 3,000 calories down to like 1,400 calories or 1,200 calories or something like that. That drastic drop is causing way too much restriction, and that is going to cause muscle loss. Another way is if the diet is restrictive as far as specific macronutrients being taken away, specific food groups being taken away. Usually that's very restrictive. And then what happens is that there is some malnourishment that occurs that causes your body to start getting rid of muscle mass in order to kind of save things and keep everything afloat, keep you alive, keep, your basic things, your basic bodily functions running. So whenever you're doing something drastic like that, cutting out major food groups, cutting out an entire macronutrient group or something like that, usually your body is going to respond by getting rid of muscle. Muscle is very metabolically expensive. It takes a lot of maintenance and upkeep. So when your body is forced into a budget because there's so much restriction happening, the first thing to go is typically going to be the muscle mass. So again, even if the scale is moving, we might not be losing the right thing. So it's very important to not be too restrictive in your calories or in specific macronutrient groups, especially your carbs and your protein. So those two things, carbs are muscle sparing. So having enough of those in kind of signals your body that, okay, let's have enough energy to do the things that we want to do, but especially your protein, because muscles are protein. So if you're not getting in enough protein, or the phases where you're not getting in enough protein, the muscle loss that likely happened on the back end of that was highly likely. So this can happen in pregnancies where maybe there's a lot of morning sickness and there wasn't a whole lot of protein being eaten during the maybe first trimester or maybe all throughout the pregnancy. And then at the end, there's that rapid weight loss. And so it just feels like, okay, my body's just getting back to normal. But if you've gone through 9 to 12 months or more of lacking in the protein that you needed, then your body was breaking down that protein in order to build the baby. And then it was getting rid of anything else because of the fact that there wasn't enough. So your protein is always going to be super important for stages like that where your body needs it for other functions like building another human being, or when you are in situations like dieting or an injury where you're not being able to work out. Those types of situations, having your protein intake nice and high is going to be super important so that you're preserving that muscle mass. But most especially when you are dieting, your protein needs actually increase. So a lot of people, in order to make that restricted calorie level work, they only want to eat things that actually taste good to them. So maybe they're not eating as much protein and they may feel deprived because of the fact that if they include protein in there, then now that's taking away calories from other things, which if you had a bigger calorie allotment, it probably wouldn't feel so bad. So that's one of the things to keep in mind, is that the lower your calories go, the higher your protein needs should go. Whenever you are in a restricted caloric state, aka dieting, whenever you are trying to lose weight, you actually need more protein than you did at maintenance levels. So that's something that not a lot of people realize, but that is something that you want to keep in mind. So when you're losing weight, you need more protein, and also as you age, those protein needs increase. So there's a lot of things working together there to make sure that you need lots of protein. And if you're not getting that and you're not getting a sufficient amount of calories when you are trying to reduce for the sake of weight loss, then even though the scale's going down, you're probably going to be losing muscle mass. The fourth sign that you are losing muscle instead of fat is in your energy levels. If you feel weaker overall, then that is a sign from your body that something is happening. Now, when you are eating less than your body needs, then it's kind of obvious why you would be weaker, because you don't have enough food in your system to spread around. But when you're taking the suggestions that we already talked about having slightly less food when you're in that deficit, and making sure there's sufficient amount of protein, sufficient amounts of fiber, things like that, when you're not being super restrictive in your intake and you're maintaining that muscle mass, you shouldn't feel like this huge fatigue level with your diet. Whenever that's happened, whenever you cross over into that type of zone where there's just an overall like exhaustion, your adrenals just feel shot, you feel like you can't get enough sleep, you are constantly feeling like hungry, but maybe you're denying that hunger because of the fact that you're trying to really stick to that diet, you don't really have a lot of energy in the gym, you start noticing your strength levels are going down, the amounts that you were able to lift get like less and less and less and less and less, and it just keeps progressing, which is not uncommon to not be like super strong as far as like hitting like personal records in the gym during a cut phase. But if you're eating a sufficient amount of calories and keeping your protein high, you should be able to keep fairly steady strength levels in the gym. If you notice that you are consistently exhausted and weak, you are likely losing some muscle mass. So keep that in mind if the scale is going down, and it's going down pretty rapidly, and you're starting to feel weak, and any of those other things that we mentioned before are in place. So make sure that you are always tuned in to your energy levels when you are dieting or trying to lose weight, because they do matter. And if you're somebody who just feels like, oh, this is just how I always feel, then try increasing your calories for a while and seeing if that does make a difference. Because a lot of people don't realize how tired they actually are until they start eating enough food, because they've just started to feel like that's just them, and that it's just I'm getting old or whatever the case may be. So there's all these other excuses when oftentimes it's just a matter of increasing that food intake. So if you feel like you're getting weaker, then that is a red flag that you may be losing muscle. The fifth sign that you may be losing muscle instead of fat is probably the one that is the most obvious, and that is that you're losing weight, but your body composition isn't changing. So if you notice that you are like the scale is consistently going down, or maybe you've reached your goal weight or the weight that you thought would be your goal weight, and you don't quite look like you thought you would at that moment. Things are a little bit softer than they were maybe the last time that you were at that weight, or perhaps you feel like, I don't understand, why are things squishy? Why is this area my arms used to always be toned, now they don't feel as toned, or my legs, or whatever the case may be. So if you feel like you're seeing the weight loss, but you're not seeing the toning up that you thought would happen along with the weight loss, then that is typically a red flag that there's some muscle mass missing. Tone, definition, the tightness that people are looking for when they go to lose weight and tone up is muscle. So if you're not seeing the tone as you lose the weight, then that means that there is a deficit of muscle. That means there is some muscle mass that's missing. So that's going to be one of the biggest keys for someone, like I say, especially when they get to their goal weight, because I see this time and time again, either women that maybe they yo-yo, but it's only in the like lose 5, gain 10, lose 5, gain 10, like it's very minimal. So it's just a slight inching up in weight. And then even if they were to finally losing it back down to what that original weight was, it doesn't look the same as they thought it would. It doesn't look the same as it did before. So that is the huge sign for them that now you don't have as much muscle mass as you had at that weight before. Now, the flip side of this is also true, because I have so many clients that, because we do the work to build muscle mass and they go through the phases of adding on muscle mass and resetting their metabolism and getting everything back to where it should be, then when they go into those fat loss phases, they actually notice muscle tone and definition at higher weights than they previously did. This is always that sign that you have more muscle mass than you had the previous time that you were at that weight. So that is, like I say, one of the biggest signs. So when you see those pictures and memes and things floating around on social media where it's showing the person at the same weight but they look different, that is usually the reason why, is because they've added muscle mass. To aim to see something like that without doing the work of adding on the muscle mass and then making sure you keep the muscle mass when you go into fat loss phases is why that doesn't happen for so many people. But that part is such a mental game that a lot of women will bypass it and feel like, it should be okay. As long as I lose the weight, it's gonna be all good. But what most women tend to find out is that if you don't take that time to build that muscle mass, if you don't take the time to, take the proper precautions to make sure that you're holding on to the muscle mass, then not only when you get to your goal weight is it not what you expected, but you usually have to overshoot it a lot in order to look the way that you did at that weight previously. Sometimes by as much as 10, 20, 30 pounds, you will have to actually go and weight like lower in order to look the same way that you did before. So for a lot of women, that is shocking. It's something that they don't want to deal with, and they're like, no way, I thought my goal weight was 150. You're telling me now that it needs to be 120. There is no way that I can ever get to 120 and maintain that, especially if the person that you're talking to is 175, 200, like 150 already seems like totally outrageous. But to find out that they would actually have to go 10, 20, 30 pounds less than that to look the way that they did at that particular time frame can be discouraging, disheartening, and make them not even want to try at all. So that is why I suggest definitely always being aware of the muscle mass factor, making sure that even if you're someone who's choosing not to go through muscle building phases, I will always give the caveat that we're all adults here and you can do whatever you want to do. But if you at least attempt to hold on to what you have, and that getting down to that 10, 20, 30 pounds below the goal weight is something that's worth it for you, then in that case, just try to preserve as much muscle mass as you can and lose weight from there. So when you look at all 5 of the things that we talked about today, if you see any of those things happening for you, if any of those red flags are present, then it might be time to just pause, take a break from dieting, reconvene, actually stop and look at the things that you're doing, look at your exercise program, look at the way that you're eating, actually take some time to look at your food logs and diaries and see what it is that you have been eating and if it's fallen into any of these categories and where you can fix it, and make those adjustments before going back into that caloric deficit and getting that fat loss. The bonus tip that I would give there is obviously you can also go and get scans from places that do body composition scans like a DEXA, or if you prefer like a bod pod or something like that. Typically DEXA is going to give the most consistent results, but they all have their pros and cons, which I can do in another video later. But if holding on to that muscle mass is important to you, those 5 tips should help you to troubleshoot any issues and to know whether or not you're losing muscle mass. So if you guys have any questions about muscle mass, metabolism, or the mindset that is required for any of them, make sure you leave me a comment below and I will make another video about that. If you are someone who needs help in building your muscle mass or rebuilding your metabolism, I'll throw some links in the description box below for other resources or programs that will help you. So thank you guys for joining, and I'll see you next time.